First contact and fatal pride. High Admiral Zirax stood at the observation deck of the Nexari Empire's flagship Eternal Dominance, his iridescent scales reflecting the distant light of Earth's sun. His secondary hearts beat with anticipation as he prepared to record his first assessment of this peculiar species that had recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Imperial Record, date 7240. 9-3. He spoke into the ship's memory crystal. Humanity's achievement of FTL capabilities has triggered the standard first contact protocols. Initial observations suggest. He paused, mandibles clicking in amusement, a remarkably primitive achievement of space travel. The bridge crew maintained their positions, multiple eyes fixed on their stations as data streamed in about the human civilization. The Nexari Empire had perfected the art of species assessment over 10,000 years. They had incorporated hundreds of alien races into their hierarchy, each taking their proper place beneath Nexari dominion. Their vessels appear to be held together by primitive welding techniques and what they call redundant systems. Zirax continued, watching as a human cargo ship lumbered past. They waste valuable space on multiple backup systems rather than perfecting a single, superior design. Typical of an immature species, his second-in-command, Strategic Officer Verilon, approached with a data crystal. High Admiral, we've completed our initial military assessment. Their most powerful weapons still rely on chemical propulsion and nuclear fission. They haven't even mastered gravity manipulation. Zirax's scales rippled with what humans might interpret as a smile. Excellent. Prepare the standard dominance display. Let's show them what real power looks like. The Nexari fleet shifted formation, their crystalline hulls catching starlight as 50 warships arranged themselves in the Empire's symbol of authority. Energy weapons charged, creating a spectacular light show that had caused countless species to immediately surrender. Send the standard greeting, Zirax ordered. Make sure their primitive translation systems can process it. The message was simple: submit to Nexari authority or face immediate consequences. It had worked flawlessly for millennia. The response came faster than expected. A human representative appeared on the main view screen, wearing what appeared to be ceremonial attire. A suit, according to their databases. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the United Earth Government, the human said, her expression unnervingly calm. We appreciate your impressive display. However, we noticed your ship's gravitational field generators are creating some interesting interference patterns. Would you like us to send you the relevant data? It might help prevent any unfortunate accidents. Zirax's primary heart skipped a beat. His scales shifted to a deeper shade of blue, a sign of confusion that he quickly suppressed. You mistake our intention, human. This is not a technical discussion. This is your species' one opportunity to submit peacefully. Dr. Chen's expression remained unchanged. Yes, we received your message. Our response remains the same. We're declining your offer of submission, but we're happy to establish diplomatic relations as equals. Also, you might want to adjust your third bank of shield emitters. The resonance frequency is slightly off. The bridge fell silent. In 10,000 years, no species had ever responded quite like this. Zirax felt his anger glands beginning to swell. You test our patience, human. Your species has barely mastered the basics of space travel. Your weapons are primitive. Your ships are crude. What makes you think you can stand against the Nexari Empire? Dr. Chen actually smiled. High Admiral, with respect, you're making some interesting assumptions. For instance, you assumed our ships look primitive because we can't build them better. You assumed our weapons are simple because we can't make them more complex. But did you consider that maybe, just maybe, we chose these designs for reasons you haven't thought of? Before Zirax could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. Warning signals flashed across every screen. High Admiral. Verilon's voice carried an edge of panic. Our long-range sensors just went dark. Some kind of electromagnetic pulse, but it's like nothing we've ever seen. Impossible, Zirax hissed. Their technology is too primitive to affect our systems. Dr. Chen's image remained on screen, that same calm smile still in place. You know what humans are really good at, High Admiral. Taking simple things and using them in ways no one expects. That primitive electromagnetic pulse. It's actually powered by the excess energy bleeding off your own shield emitters. The ones we tried to warn you about. Zirax watched in horror as his mighty fleet systems began failing one by one. The humans hadn't built some advanced weapon to defeat them. They'd simply turned the Nexari's own technology against itself. This is your final warning, Dr. Chen said, her voice firm but not unkind. Return to your empire. Tell them humanity is not interested in submission. We are, however, very interested in peaceful cooperation, once you're ready to see us as equals. As emergency power kicked in and his crew scrambled to restore their systems, High Admiral Zirax realized, with dawning horror, that the Nexari Empire had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed technological advancement followed a single, predictable path. They had assumed their way was the only way. Humanity had just proven them catastrophically wrong. Imperial Record, Supplemental. Zirax spoke quietly into the memory crystal. Initial assessment of human capabilities requires significant revision. In the darkness of his partially powered bridge, watching the distant lights of Earth's orbital defense platforms powering up with energy siphoned from his own fleet's shields, High Admiral Zirax learned humanity's first lesson. Never mistake simplicity for weakness. It would not be the last lesson they taught him. The art of adaptation. Supreme Commander Ixal of the Nexari War Council watched the holographic replay of High Admiral Zirax's humiliation for the 12th time. The massive war chamber, carved from living crystal, hummed with the agitated energy of 24 of the Empire's highest-ranking military leaders. Impossible, General Kextor muttered, his war scales bristling. Their technology is centuries behind ours. They shouldn't have been able to affect our systems at all. Ixal raised a clawed hand for silence. And yet they did. Not with superior technology, but by understanding our technology better than we do ourselves. His inner eyelids flickered in annoyance. The humans have forced our hand. We must respond with overwhelming force. The chamber's crystal walls pulsed with angry red light as Ixal activated the strategic display. 3,000 warships appeared in holographic form, representing the largest fleet the Empire had assembled in 5 centuries. We will strike simultaneously at every major human settlement, Ixal declared. Their colonies on Mars, Venus, and their orbital habitats. No more diplomatic posturing. No more warnings. We will show them the true might of the Empire. The assembled commanders chittered their approval, but one voice cut through the bloodthirsty chorus. Supreme Commander, if I may. All eyes turned to Science Director Nixia, her scales a thoughtful shade of green. The humans' response to Admiral Zirax suggests they anticipated our tactics. Perhaps we should. They got lucky once. Ixal interrupted. They exploited a single weakness that has already been corrected. Our new shield harmonics are impervious to their primitive interference. Nixia's scales darkened. Sir, I've been studying their information networks. Their entertainment media, specifically. They have thousands of scenarios about alien invasions. They've been mentally preparing for this possibility for centuries. Laughter rippled through the chamber. You suggest we should fear their imagination. General Kextor mocked. I suggest we should respect it. Nixia replied quietly. But Ixal had heard enough. The Empire's honor demanded action. The attack begins in 6 hours. We will crush them so thoroughly that no species will ever again dare to resist us. The human response came 5 hours and 58 minutes later. Supreme Commander. The sensor operator's scales had turned pale gray with shock. Energy signatures appearing throughout the fleet. They're coming from our own ships. Ixal watched in horror as hundreds of small devices materialized inside their supposedly impenetrable shields. Each one was crude, barely more than a fusion core attached to a primitive radio transmitter. "Impossible," he whispered. "Our shields." "Message from Earth Defense Command," the communications officer announced. A human appeared on the main screen, wearing what appeared to be maintenance coveralls. "This is Chief Engineer Martins of the UEG Corps of Engineers. We notice you adjusted your shield harmonics after our last encounter. Very impressive. So we thought you should know. We've spent the last week testing different transporter frequencies. Turns out your new shields have a really interesting resonance pattern when exposed to certain radio waves. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to try out our new emergency teleporter beacons, by the way. We've been wanting to field test them." Ixal's scales burned with rage. "You dare." "Oh, and one more thing," Martinez continued. "Those beacons, they're sending out a signal that mimics your ship's internal command frequencies. You might want to check your weapon systems. Right about now." Throughout the fleet, thousands of weapon systems suddenly engaged their safety protocols, interpreting the crude human devices' signals as legitimate commands from their own systems. "Shut them down," Ixal roared. "Override all automated systems." "We can't, sir. They're not actually hacking our systems. They're just broadcasting noise on the right frequencies. Our safety protocols are working exactly as designed." That's when the human ships appeared. They weren't the same primitive vessels they'd observed before. These ships bristled with weaponry that looked suspiciously like modified Nexari technology. "Did you really think we spent the last week just working on teleporters?" Martins asked, almost apologetically. "We've been studying the wreckage from your last visit. Your technology is impressive, but it's very rigid. You build everything to be perfect, but inflexible. We prefer adaptability." The human ships opened fire. Their weapons were cruder than Nexari equivalents, but they had been specifically designed to target weaknesses that no other species had ever even recognized. Weaknesses that stemmed from the Nexari's pursuit of perfection at the expense of versatility. "Pull back," Ixal ordered. "Regroup at—" "Sorry, not done with the demonstration yet," Martinez interrupted. "You see those cargo ships approaching? The ones you probably dismissed as harmless. We've spent decades perfecting the art of modifying civilian tech for military use. Would you like to see what a mining laser can do when you reconfigure it to match your hull's resonant frequency?" The answer, as it turned out, was quite a lot. 6 hours later, as Ixal prepared to deliver the most humiliating report in Imperial history, he received one final message from Earth. "Supreme Commander," Martinez's voice was surprisingly gentle. "We know you'll probably be ordered to try again. When you do, remember this: humans don't think like you do. We don't build perfect weapons. We build adaptable ones. We don't create invincible defenses. We create flexible ones. And most importantly, we don't fight like you do. We improvise. We adapt. We overcome. Next time, bring something unexpected. We love a good challenge." In the silence of his command chamber, Supreme Commander Ixal began to understand the true nature of the enemy they faced. The humans hadn't just prepared for this conflict. They had spent their entire history preparing for it. Every piece of technology they built was designed to be repurposed, every system created with modification in mind. They hadn't mastered perfection like the Nexari. They had mastered something far more dangerous: the art of adaptation itself. Breaking point. The Imperial Palace's war room had never seen such chaos. Emergency lights cast an ominous glow across the gathered faces of the Nexari High Command as they watched their greatest defensive crumble into disaster. Grand Marshal Kvex, supreme leader of all Nexari military forces, stood rigid as reports flooded in. 5,000 ships, the combined might of 3 sector fleets, had just engaged the human defense forces at Jupiter. It was supposed to be an overwhelming show of force, a demonstration of power that would finally break humanity's will to resist. Instead, it had become something else entirely. "Status report," Kvex demanded, his scales shifting to deep purple with barely controlled rage. Fleet Commander Zena, her own scales a sickly gray, gestured at the tactical display. The humans, they'd done something impossible, sir. They've turned Jupiter's magnetic field into a weapon. The holographic display showed the gas giant's massive form, its swirling storms now interwoven with artificial patterns that pulsed with deadly energy. Human ships dove through these electromagnetic storms like fish through water, while Nexiri vessels found their shields disrupted by the planet's enhanced magnetic field. Impossible, Kivex hissed. No species has ever weaponized a gas giant's magnetosphere. The energy requirements alone. Message from the human commander. The communications officer interrupted. The hologram shifted to show a human woman, Admiral Zhang, sitting casually in what appeared to be a standard bridge chair. Behind her, officers worked at stations that looked suspiciously like modified Nexiri technology. Grand Marshal, she nodded respectfully. I see you've noticed our little modification to Jupiter. Would you believe we got the idea from one of our children's science projects? Something about using magnets to generate electricity. The principle scaled up rather nicely, especially once we integrated some of your power generation technology. Kivex's scales bristled. You dare mock us? We are the Nexiri Empire. We have ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. And that's exactly your problem, Zhang replied, her tone almost sympathetic. You've spent 10 millennia perfecting what you already know. We've spent our entire history learning to do more with less. You want to see what else we've learned from your technology. The tactical display suddenly bloomed with new signatures. Hundreds of small craft were emerging from Jupiter's atmosphere, their energy signatures barely registering on Nexiri sensors. We noticed your sensors are calibrated for high-energy signatures, Zhang explained. So we built ships that use minimal power. We noticed your targeting systems rely on predictive algorithms based on standard combat doctrine. So we programmed our attack patterns using random number generators seeded with lottery results. Kivex watched in horror as the human craft executed maneuvers that seemed to defy both physics and logic. They moved like confused insects, their patterns impossible to predict, yet somehow coordinated in their chaos. But our favorite discovery, Zhang continued, was finding out how your automated target prioritization works. Your ships always target the greatest threat first. Very logical, very efficient, very predictable. That's when Kivex realized the trap. The small craft weren't the real threat. They were a distraction. While the Nexiri fleet's automated systems were busy trying to calculate threat levels for hundreds of erratically moving targets, larger human vessels were sliding into position, their weapons powered down to avoid detection. Emergency override. Kivex roared. Manual targeting only. Too late, Zhang said softly. Here's another human lesson for your archives. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the biggest or the most advanced. Sometimes it's just the one your enemy doesn't see coming. The human capital ships powered up simultaneously. Their weapons weren't particularly powerful by Nexiri standards, but they didn't need to be. They had positioned themselves perfectly to strike at weak points that only became apparent when studying Nexiri technology from an entirely new perspective. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than an hour. When it was over, 2,000 Nexiri ships had been disabled or destroyed. The remainder were retreating in disarray, their carefully planned formations shattered by tactics that defied every principle of conventional space warfare. A final note, Admiral Zhang said as the Nexiri fleet withdrew. We've been studying your history. 10,000 years of uncontested dominance has made you forget something fundamental about combat. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best weapons. It's the one who spent their entire existence learning to win despite being outgunned. She leaned forward, her expression serious. You attacked us because we refused to submit, but you never asked why we refused. It's not pride or stubbornness. It's because humanity has spent its entire history fighting against overwhelming odds. It's not just what we do, it's what we are. The transmission cut off. leaving Quevecs staring at the aftermath of their greatest military disaster in 10 millennia. In the silence that followed, Science Director Nixia spoke up from her corner of the war room. "Sir," she said quietly, "I've been analyzing their tactics. They're not just using our technology. They're redefining what's possible with it. Every time we attack, they learn more about us. Every weapon we deploy teaches them new ways to fight. They're not just defeating us. They're evolving faster than we can adapt." Quevecs's scales had faded to a pale blue of defeat. How? How can they advance so quickly? "Because," Nixia replied, "they never stopped practicing. Every piece of entertainment media I studied, every game they play, every story they tell, they're all about overcoming superior forces. They've been preparing for this fight since before they knew we existed." As emergency reports continued to flood in, Quevecs faced a realization that shook him to his core. The Nexeri Empire hadn't just encountered a new species. They had awakened something that their 10,000 years of dominance had never prepared them for, a species that turned adaptation itself into an art form. The tables turn. The Imperial Palace's central spire trembled as Grand Marshal Quevecs faced the Nexeri High Council. The massive chamber, designed to inspire awe with its crystalline architecture, now felt more like a tomb. The latest reports from the front had turned to scales and ashen gray. "The humans have launched their counter-offensive," he reported, his voice hollow. "They're not just defending anymore. They're advancing into Imperial space." The council chamber erupted in disbelief. High Counselor Vexra, her ceremonial scales glinting in the artificial light, leaned forward. How? Their fleet was vastly outnumbered. Even with their unconventional tactics, they couldn't possibly. "They're not using their fleet," Quevecs interrupted. "At least, not in any way we understand." The tactical display activated, showing a peculiar sight. Human ships were appearing and disappearing throughout Imperial space, striking with surgical precision before vanishing again. But these weren't normal vessels. They were hybrid creations, combining human ingenuity with captured Nexeri technology. "They'd done something to our faster-than-light drive signatures," Science Director Nixia explained, her scales shifting anxiously. "They're using our own transportation networks against us. Every time we transit between systems, we leave a wake, for lack of a better term. They'd found a way to ride these distortions." "Impossible," another counselor protested. "The energy requirements alone ruled." "They're using our own power plants to do it," Nixia continued. "Remember those ships they disabled in previous battles? They didn't destroy them. They studied them, modified them, turned them into something new." The display shifted to show a human vessel emerging from what appeared to be a fold in space itself. It was a patchwork creation, part human engineering, part Nexeri technology, and part something entirely new. "Message from the human fleet," the communications officer announced, his scales pale with dread. Admiral Zhang appeared on the screen, but this time she wasn't on a bridge. She stood in what appeared to be a research facility, surrounded by dismantled Nexeri technology and holographic displays covered in human writing. "Grand Marshal," she nodded, "I thought you might want to see where we've been doing our homework. Your technology is remarkable, you know. The problem is, you stopped asking questions about it centuries ago." She gestured to a partially disassembled Nexeri power core. "Take this, for example. You use it to generate energy in a perfect, controlled reaction. But did you ever wonder what would happen if you deliberately introduced imperfections, created controlled chaos within the system?" The display showed human ships using modified Nexeri power cores to tear holes in space itself, slipping through the fabric of reality in ways that defied Imperial understanding of physics. "You see, Grand Marshal, that's the fundamental difference between our species," Zhang continued. "You seek perfection. We seek possibility. You ask, how can we make this perfect? We ask, what else can this do?" Quevecs watched as human forces systematically dismantled Imperial defenses that had stood for millennia. They weren't just winning battles, they were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. But here's the most interesting part, Zhang said, her expression thoughtful. Every time we crack one of your technological puzzles, we find something new to try. Your gravity weapons, we reversed the polarity, turned them into shields. Your communication systems, rewire them to create sensor ghosts that fool your targeting systems. Even your ship's self-repair protocols, we found a way to make them propagate changes we introduced. Your own vessels are evolving under our guidance. The tactical display showed the extent of human advancement into imperial space. They weren't following traditional invasion patterns. Instead, they were selecting targets that seemed random until you understood their true purpose. Each strike taught them something new about Nexari technology, which they then incorporated into their next innovation. We're not just defeating your forces, Grand Marshal, Zhang explained. We're learning from them. Every engagement makes us stronger, not because we're destroying your ships, but because we're understanding them better. Your empire spent 10,000 years becoming perfect. We've spent 6 months learning how to turn that perfection into something else entirely. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Nexari Empire had created the most advanced civilization in known space, but in doing so, they had stopped evolving. Humans, with their constant drive to experiment and adapt, had turned that very advancement into a weapon against them. You have a choice to make, Zhang said finally. Your empire can continue to fight, and will continue to learn. Every battle will teach us more, make us stronger, help us evolve. Or, Kivex found himself asking, or we can try something new. Something unprecedented in your 10,000 years of history. Zhang smiled. We can collaborate. Think about it. Your perfection combined with our creativity. Your stability with our drive to experiment. We could learn from each other. As the transmission ended, Kivex turned to face the High Council. For the first time in Imperial history, the Nexari faced a force that couldn't be defeated through superior technology or overwhelming force. They faced a species that turned every defeat into a lesson, every setback into an opportunity for growth. The Empire had achieved perfection, but humanity had achieved something far more powerful. The ability to see perfection not as an end, but as a beginning. Evolution of understanding. 5 years after the first contact between humanity and the Nexari Empire, High Counselor Vexorus stood in the newly constructed Galactic Innovation Center on Earth. The massive structure was itself a testament to the unprecedented changes sweeping through both civilizations. Its crystalline spires were pure Nexari architecture, but they pulsed with ever-changing light patterns controlled by human-designed adaptive systems. Remarkable, she muttered, her scales shifting through patterns of wonder and disbelief as she watched humans and Nexari working side by side in the research chambers below. In all our history, we never imagined this possibility. Admiral Zhang, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Nexari, stood beside her. That was the problem, wasn't it? You stopped imagining possibilities altogether. The research floor buzzed with activity. Nexari scientists, who had spent centuries perfecting existing technologies, now worked alongside human engineers who constantly asked what if. The results were transforming both civilizations in ways neither could have predicted. Watch this, Zhang said, directing Vexor's attention to a testing chamber. A young human scientist stood next to a Nexari researcher, both focused on what appeared to be a standard Imperial power core. But this core was different. Its perfect crystalline structure had been deliberately altered, introducing controlled imperfections that created new energy patterns. Traditional Nexari power core efficiency, 99.98%, the human scientist announced. Modified core with controlled chaos patterns, 157% equivalent output, with bonus gravitational effects we're still trying to understand. The Nexari researchers' scales flickered with excitement, an emotion that would have been suppressed in the old empire. The imperfections. They're creating resonance patterns we never considered possible. Instead of fighting entropy, we're using it. Vexra's secondary hearts beat faster as she watched. Similar scenes played out across the facility, human creativity combining with necessary precision to create technologies that neither species could have developed alone. "Your people haven't just changed our technology," she admitted to Zhang. "You've changed us, the very way we think." Zhang nodded. "And you've changed us too. We're learning that sometimes perfection has its place. The trick is knowing when to perfect and when to experiment." They moved to another observation point, overlooking what had once been the Imperial fleet's primary shipyard. Now it produced vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, ships that combined necessary precision engineering with human adaptability. "Look there," John pointed to a new class of vessel under construction. "Necessary crystalline hull technology, but we introduced programmable imperfections. The entire ship can reconfigure itself in response to damage or changing conditions. Perfect engineering made adaptable." Vexra watched as the ship's hull shifted and flowed like liquid crystal, demonstrating a level of flexibility that would have been considered heretical in the old empire. "And your people? How have they adapted to these changes?" Zhang laughed. "Are you kidding? We're having the time of our lives. Do you know how many science fiction writers are saying, 'I told you so' right now? We've been dreaming about this kind of technological revolution for centuries." A commotion from one of the research bays drew their attention. A team of human and necessary scientists had just successfully tested a new form of faster-than-light travel, combining imperial precision with human theoretical physics. The humans were celebrating with their typical exuberance, while the necessary researchers' scales displayed patterns of joy that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. "That's the real breakthrough," Zhang said softly. "Not the technology, but this." She gestured to the celebrating teams. Two species learning that they're better together than apart. Vexra's scales shifted to a deep blue of contemplation. "When we first encountered humanity, we thought we were perfect, undefeatable. We never considered that perfection itself might be a weakness, and we thought we had to defeat you to survive." Zhang added, "We never imagined that our greatest victory would come not from fighting your empire, but from helping it evolve." They moved to the facility's apex, where a massive window offered a view of Earth and the surrounding space. Ships of both species moved in harmony through the lanes of traffic, each design unique, yet clearly influenced by both civilizations. "The rest of the galaxy is watching," Vexra noted. "Many species that once feared the Empire are now asking to join our research efforts." Zhang smiled. "Of course they are. You taught them the power of perfection. We showed them the power of adaptation. Together, we're demonstrating something even more important, the power of evolution itself." Below them, in one of the main research halls, a new team of young scientists from both species was preparing to begin their first project. The humans brought their wild ideas and ceaseless questioning, while the necessary contributed their precision and deep understanding of fundamental principles. "Your warriors have a saying," Vexra said, watching the team. "Perfection is the end of progress. And your philosophers teach that chaos brings only destruction," Zhang replied. "Turns out we were both wrong. Perfection without adaptation is stagnation. Chaos without precision is waste. But together we become something new," Vexra finished. Her scales shifted to a color that had no name in the old imperial language, a shade that represented not perfection or chaos, but endless possibility. In the space around Earth, a new ship emerged from the experimental yards. Its hull gleamed with necessary crystalline perfection, but within that perfection were carefully crafted imperfections, spaces for growth and change. It was neither human nor necessary, but something new, something that could adapt without losing its strength, evolve without sacrificing its foundation. It was, perhaps, a glimpse of the future both species would build together. Not a future of perfect order or constant chaos, but one of endless evolution, where each day brought new questions and every question led to new possibilities. The great Nexari Empire had sought perfection for 10,000 years. Humanity had spent its history adapting to overcome its limitations. Together, they had found something greater than either could have achieved alone. The perfect balance between stability and change, between tradition and innovation, between what is and what could be. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, new species were emerging, looking up at the stars and wondering what they might find there. They would find neither the unstoppable empire nor the upstart humans of old stories. Instead, they would discover a civilization that had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true greatness lies not in achieving perfection, but in never stopping the journey toward it.